Rumi said you can never get to God until you become a heretic.
Yes.
What is a heretic? Someone that goes against the doctrine, against the book. You cannot have a God experience by reading stuff and memorizing it. And so James Carse wrote an amazing book called The Religious Case Against Belief. And what he showed very thoroughly, and he is a very, very amazing man with 38 years as a professor in New York University of philosophy and theology or religion. It's either theology or religion. But he made the point that all religions are belief systems. And as soon as you believe, you close the door to the numinous, to the sacred, to the transcendent. You concretize something in your mind and believe it, and it becomes fixed. Therefore, if anything amazing happens that's not within the context of that, you either don't have a label for it, therefore you ignore it, or you think it's evil, or you can't contextualize it. But in order to have a spiritual experience, you have got to be open to the mystery of God. And you can't know God by definition. It's impossible. And I could go, I talked about this in the previous podcast, so I won't rattle down that road. You can only experience God. You cannot possibly know God because God is infinite. So how do you know something that's infinite? It's impossible to do. The point I'm making is you can't have a religious experience if you have beliefs about God, because the belief stops you from being open to a new idea. I say to people all the time, how much Buddhism could you put in the Bible before it wasn't Christianity anymore? Most people would say none. So that's why it's a belief system. All belief systems are closed. As soon as you start adding to a belief system, then people are confused about what it is. What is the practice? What isn't the practice? What is the do's and the don'ts? And so religions keep people in the child archetype, just like we believed in Santa Claus, but later realized who it was. If you keep people in a belief system and you can threaten their life with breaking the rules, you've got the world's greatest business model. Yeah, and religion is the most profitable industry in the world based on
it's trippy though. I saw an interview with Carl Jung, and the interviewer was very good. Yeah. And he said, do you believe in God? And Jung looked at him and he said, believe? Yeah. I know God.
Yes.
But then it's counterintuitive to what you just shared. Yeah. Because can we ever actually know God?
Sure you can. You just have to ask the right questions.
What questions would you ask to Jung if he was here right now?
I wouldn't need to ask him any because I also know God. I would just acknowledge there's a man that I can trust, and he's obviously had God experiences.
Yes.
But what he is saying is I don't need to believe because I know. See, if you teach a child math and you say, memorize these math tables, and the child's, let's say 6, and they memorize 8 times 8 is 64, but then you say, well, how did you get there? They don't know. They just believe because the school teacher said, memorize 8 times 8 is 64, 2 times 2 is 4.
Yes.
And so they believe. But it's, I'll give you an example of this. When I was in electronics school in the military, which I spent a year in electronics school, I had to go to math school for 2 months first. That was no fun. They have a policy there. First of all, you're not allowed to use calculators, and it's heavy math. You have to figure out electrical circuits and resistors and capacitors. I mean, it's full on. Imagine, you're talking about Cobra helicopters here. That's what I worked on. So it's the most advanced electronics, probably next to a fighter jet. But what they do, what the instructors do, is the instructors got a good intuition. I mean, that's what they've been doing oftentimes for 20 years is teaching this stuff. And so if you turn your test in and you got the right answer, but they smell that you don't actually know how you got it, they come over to you, hand you a piece of paper and a pencil, and they say, take me through every step you went through to get that answer. And if you cannot explain how every equation works and why you got the answer, they'll mark it wrong, even if you got the right answer. Okay, so what's the difference? Sometimes I would get the right answer because I believed it was the right answer, but the instructor would come over and show me I did not know how I got it, and I would not get the answer right because in a battlefield, if testing equipment gets hit by a bomb or a missile, you have to fix it by hand. So you cannot believe, you have to know, because if you get lucky on a test, but you can't get lucky in a battlefield under heavy stress, then you have to know. So the difference between believing is you don't know how you got there, you just believe. When you know, you can reproduce it.
So it's not necessarily that you and Jung are saying that you know God in the way that we would, I guess, use the nomenclature of know, the word know. There's a different energy in which you're speaking about.
What he's saying is that I don't need to believe in God like a child believes in Santa Claus, because I have such deep experience of God in my life and in my inner sanctum that there's no need for a belief. It would be like saying, Josh, do you believe you have a heart, or do you know you have one?
We know.
Well, you say, well, look, Paul, I got a pulse and I got anatomy books. And you could take whatever rationale you want. You say, I don't need to believe I have a heart. I have a heart.
Yeah.
I know. Yeah. Jung's saying, I know I have a heart. Take heart out and put God in. That's what he's saying.
Okay. So in so many ways, when I trace back all the different clips that I've seen your team put out, there was one that hit me the hardest, and you were 12 and you had talked about when your dad had passed when you were 8.
Yeah.
And you were dealing with insane amount of a wound in your heart, deep in your heart.
Yeah.
And then at
many
night,
of them.
many of them. But so at 12, you had this really surreal moment where you were out in a field, and we'll link the clip so everybody can watch this. It's truly profound, because I think that deep sadness you talked about, I felt that in my life. I was angry at God. I used to literally, when my mom was sick, she's had manic bipolar my whole life. I used to say something like, fuck you, God.
Yes.
I was so angry at God. Little did I know I was angry at life and not trusting, and angry at myself, because I didn't have the faculty.
God too.
That's God too.
Yeah.
But then at 19, you had another moment. So you had these two significant moments: your father passing at 8, 12 years old, a moment with God out in a field in the rain.
Yeah.
And then 19 years old on an oil rig drilling. I have to wonder, like, with all of these moments where you were so seeking this knowing, this experience of God, and now in your 60s, you're literally a conduit teaching people about how they can have experience with God.
That's exactly what my dream is, not to tell them what God is, but to show them how to engage consciousness. Because if God is not consciousness, then there can't be a God, because how would you know that there was anything without consciousness? So the way I do that is I teach people how to connect to their own soul. And since only God can give a soul, which is the consciousness within, the day you make contact with your own soul and develop a relationship, you've found the only God that you can truly know.
Do you feel like this communion or this experience with God comes to us in these moments of severe pain? Are those the tabernacle? Is that the proving ground for us to actually know God and experience God?
My first profound God experience, actually, no, it wasn't my first, because you've just reminded me about those, but my first samadhi, where I became one with the entire universe, strangely, which shocked me, happened as I was watching my first son come out of the birth canal.
Oh, yeah.
I was watching his head, and just when his head popped out through his mother's vagina and only his head was sticking out, and I realized that that was somehow a copy of me and her together, I really loved her. So, and it was also a very scary time for me, because I had just turned 18. My parents were broke. Her parents were broke. Nobody could support us. And that was when she got pregnant, is when I knew I had to become a man and make it happen by myself. And there was no rescue from mommy or daddy on either side of the fence. It was do or die. Her mother tried desperately to get her to get an abortion, but she wouldn't do it. We ended up I basically had to pull up in front of her house in a hurry. She ran out the door with all of her clothes tucked under her arm, dragging a bag, and her mother grabbing her by the hair, trying to tackle her. And she threw her stuff in my truck, pushed her mother away, got in, and we drove away. And then it was us from that moment on. And when Paul Jr. came out of the birth canal, probably for about, I would guess, 2 or 3 minutes, I was in every star, I was in galaxies, and strangely enough, on my first DMT journey, I had the experience of becoming one with everything, but I was millions of eyes looking into the world. And I drew a mandala of it, and it's just eyes everywhere, very Alex Grey. And after that experience, I could see a lot more in Alex Grey's art. But when I was in this samadhi experience, like I'm only 18. This is a very profound experience for an 18-year-old to have.
Yeah.
And I'm in the universe, but my consciousness is so expanded for about 3 minutes, I forgot that who I was. I was just a witness to it all, but somehow it was all me. And then as I started, all of a sudden realized, oh my God, my sense of self, I am somehow everywhere at the same time. And then I realized my son's being born. And there was a moment when I looked down, and it was as though I could see right through the hospital. And I was watching myself stand there while the nurse was bringing the baby out. And I was standing like right next to her. And I was watching myself, seeing my son born. And when I finally came back into my body, I was so stunned I couldn't talk. But fortunately, because of birthing is quite a powerful experience, nobody around me suspected something was wrong. But imagine taking a full hit of DMT and then standing in a birthing process. Some people might think, you're a little bit out of it, but because it was a birthing process, they didn't realize that I was actually having a really hard time figuring out what had just happened.
Yeah. Oh my God.
The other two experiences you talked about were very different.
Yeah.
They were equally shocking, but there was no one with the universe. It was me being, the first one, being very upset with God because the circumstances of my life were so painful. Based on my childhood Christian programming, I thought, what have I done to deserve this? How have I sinned so badly? I'm only a child. I mean, what did I do wrong? All I've ever done is what people told me to do. And so I was very angry because the pain and the loss, and, my father had drowned. And
were you angry at God because he drowned? Like, did you have anger towards life? It
wasn't about, I was angry because my mother married a very violent, very abusive man that treated children like farm animals and had no sense of what a child is. And, there was no playtime. It was work, work, work from the time you get up to the time you go to bed. It was hard farm work. And he couldn't give a shit about my love of sports or anything. I felt like I was in a prison camp, and he was violent and painful and, beat my mother up, beat us up. And so I was so angry because I couldn't for the life of me figure out what did I deserve to do to be in this situation. And so I just was standing in the middle of about a 10-acre field picking rocks because there was so many rocks in the soil that it would damage our farm equipment like plows and rakes. And so whenever we were done with our other animal chores and hay work, fences, feeding, watering, it was out to the rocks. And, it's on Vancouver Island. It's cold. It's wet. It's like 35 degrees, pissing rain, muddy. And I'm like, this is somehow I just knew that I didn't want to live this way. So I just got pissed off, threw a tantrum at God, looked up at the sky and started cussing God out and saying, why in the hell? What have I done wrong? And after about 2 minutes of me just rip roaring at God, a voice from every direction at once, above, below, within, around, everywhere, simultaneously said, your life will be one of purpose. Everything will be okay. And I was stunned. I was scared to death because this voice was very deep and profound. I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman, but it sounded like maybe a deep Aboriginal woman speaking, but it could have been Earl Jones, the famous
James Earl Jones.
James Earl Jones, yeah.
Yeah.
Like it was that deep. And I was looking all around me, and I'm in an open field, right? Surrounded by barbed wire. And there's nothing but me and dirt and rocks and trees around the fence line. And I'm like confused as hell as to how this could possibly happen. But somehow that voice did calm me. It planted the seed in my mind that it would be okay. The second time it happened is I was 19, and I was having to do every job I could find to feed my wife and my son and pay the bills, and unemployment rates were very high. And so I was working in exploration and water well drilling, and I was covered from head to toe in black drilling mud. I was freezing cold, and we were on our way back from a job which was on a remote island, and we were on this big ferry and it was a drilling rig that's on a great big giant semi truck. And the guys all went in to have a coffee and kind of just warm up. But I just was at that state where, like, is that what my life is going to be, drilling holes in the dirt? You know, like, even though I was making really good money at that time, I think I was making like $19 an hour, which is really high wages at that time. You know, I was 19, so what would that be? It was probably 1980, you know. I just knew I needed to open my heart to God, and I needed to be alone. So I stayed in the truck covered in mud and dirt and wet. And I didn't get mad. Somehow I just knew God could hear me. That first experience made it very clear to me. And then the birth experience that happened about a year before, I knew God was real. I didn't need to believe. And so I just sat and just talked, opened my heart, tears in my eyes, and said, you know, God, is this all I'm going to amount to? And as shocking, all of a sudden the voice, again, same voice from every direction at once. I'm in the bottom of a ferry boat, right? There's nobody around. Everybody's upstairs getting warm and drinking coffee and eating food. And quite miraculously, the voice said, your life will be one of purpose. You will become a massage therapist. You will be able to control your schedule. You will be very successful. Do not worry. And I'm like, a massage therapist? I don't know anything about massage. I'm a guy that builds race cars and dirt bikes and races motocross, and, you know, I'm a martial artist and a boxer. And so the funny thing is right after that happened, I remembered that when I was a child, I had asthma, and the only thing that would help it, the inhalers didn't help, the medications didn't help. But when my grandmother would massage me, she would take mentholatum and rub it into my chest and my neck and on my back. And she would touch me with so much love. And within 10 minutes, my asthma would be gone. And it was the only thing that took my asthma away. And I realized when I actually did become a massage therapist, in fact, I started the first massage therapy program in the entire United States Army for the boxing team. Before I even had gone to massage school, fighters used to say, you've got amazing hands. How did you learn this? And I say, I don't know. But I realized I had imprinted my grandmother's touch. And I just could feel her working through me. And so I was reading books on sports massage therapy, but I was practicing. I would read the book and practice. But by the time I got to massage school, the instructors said, it's pretty wild that you've never been to massage school, because you actually work like someone who's a skilled professional. And so the paradox of all this was, I did become a massage therapist. I did get out of the Army and start a very successful business and set my own schedule and do exactly what I wanted to. And I did find it miraculous that here I am, 3 years out of the Army, making over $100,000 a year, specializing in medical failures, running a super successful practice, which ultimately all that became the foundation of the Chek Institute. And so that's a couple of examples of how I know God. I don't need to believe.
If you like that clip, click the one that's on the screen now, and I promise you, you'll enjoy it just the same, if not more.